Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Mormon Meat Locker. I am your host, Cable Jenkins, and along with fellow co-host Caroline Kingsley, and tonight we have Jeremy Holm with us.
Hello, and the Mormon Meat Locker podcast is a way for us to discuss LDS singles topics. We are LDS singles, and it's for LDS singles. And today we have Jeremy Holm here to discuss with us the heavy issue of depression and suicide, because it is a big issue in our community. Jeremy, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I do actually like long walks on the beach. I know we were talking about that earlier, so I'm just going to say that right now. But I actually, yes, LDS single right here. I am from Pennsylvania. I grew up in Oklahoma and now reside here in Utah for work and training. So I love it here.
Awesome. So what is your experience with the topic of depression and suicide?
Actually, it's a bit personal and professional at the same time. So when I was in junior high, I started to experience the symptoms of what we now know as depression. At that time, we didn't really talk about it. You know, most of us didn't hear the words depression. We didn't hear the words anxiety. So through junior high and high school, I just kind of struggled silently. I thought that's what you do. You just keep it inside and you keep moving forward. So that's when I got back from my mission. I actually, about mid-20s, decided to start talking to somebody about it. And that's when I was diagnosed at the time with depression, actually. And then since that day, I've tried to use my influence as an author and a bobsled athlete and a motivational speaker to kind of raise awareness about depression, talk about the stigmas surrounding mental illness, just help people get it out in the open. I realize that it doesn't have to be a burden for them. So it's kind of followed me throughout my life, and right now my big goal is to just help others deal with it.
Well, and I think this is a timely topic right now because we recently had a suicide in the LDS singles community, and I know it's just one of several. And so, and not only is it obviously horribly tragic for one of our own to pass away, but talking to good friends of mine, there are so many of us that do have those dark moments. Like, I am fortunate that I don't deal with long-term depression and anxiety, but I do have these moments where I will just crumble and the world seems too difficult and I feel worthless and I feel hopeless. And in those dark moments, you feel completely alienated. And I know that so many of us in the community feel that same way. And that was why I felt like, one, no more singles dying, no more people committing suicide. Whatever we can do, obviously it's going to be someone's choice at the end of the day, but anything that we can do to support each other, to increase that support and that connection among each other, because I honestly feel like so many of us look around at each other and adore each other, and we have amazing things to say about each other, but we don't always vocalize it, and we don't always make it out like we could. But even beyond the suicide thing, or before it, I guess, we don't necessarily have to suffer in silence like you're talking about. Like, we don't have to be dealing with it alone. You don't have to feel alone.
Yeah, I think one thing that you covered a lot of great points that we can talk about, actually. One of the big ones is there are different kind of categories of suicide. You know, each of us, when we experience a traumatic event or a loss in life, it's natural to go through a period of depression. You know, a lot of mid-singles have gone through divorce, and so they've experienced a lot of depression after that with the loss of a marriage and a family situation. So a depression like that can last for, you know, depending on the event, it can be a couple days, it could be a couple months. Major depression can be, you know, a couple months or more, and then clinical depression can be something that hangs around for years and years. So I think one of the first steps for anyone, LDS singles included, to do is kind of evaluate where they're at. Is this something that's kind of circumstantial, it's been caused by an event in their life, or is this something that's kind of ongoing throughout their life? I think once you've identified that, it becomes easier to kind of figure out, how do I handle this? You mentioned that as mid-singles, as LDS singles, it's very easy for us to put on kind of a happy face, pretend everything's okay. And we do that because we're putting ourselves out there socially, dating-wise, everything. And so we want to appear that everything's okay because we're afraid that if we talk about something heavy like depression that we're dealing with, there's that little fear that the other person might judge us or that we won't fit in. So I think number one, that's a stigma, and it's not based on truth. Most mid-singles are very loving, very compassionate, very accepting. And you look at how quickly we rush to these charity events that are organized. And not that we want to consider any one person a charity case, but at the same time, that level of compassion we have as a group can be pointed and directed towards an individual who's struggling. So I think once we all kind of work through that stigma and realize it's okay to have depression as an LDS single, and that our friends and associates are not going to ostracize us or consider us broken or anything like that, it kind of takes a weight off of our shoulders. So I think number one, as an individual and as a group, as we can work through that, realize depression's okay, it's normal, it happens. I mean, it's just part of life. When somebody who's depressed starts to isolate themselves, the problem is the weight they carry, they're trying to do it by themselves. And depression affects our mental thought processes. So when they isolate themselves, the thoughts they're thinking might not they might not be healthy, and they might not be helpful. So it really takes outside sources sometimes, like a good friend or a parent or a neighbor or whatever it might be, to kind of talk us through that. And so the second point I would make is, if you're feeling depressed, don't isolate yourself. It actually makes the problem worse instead of making it better.
Well, and I think something along these lines, like, and I'm still working on being a little bit better myself to reach out. We all have the same fears, like, and I'm a basket case all the time, in these really bad moments. Yeah. And so you don't want people to form an entire opinion about your entire self based on a bad moment. But also, as I have to friends, some of my closest friends, people I trust, I have gotten so much closer to them as I have been vulnerable, allowed myself to be vulnerable. And then they've been the same to me, and we've developed like an honestly so much more in-depth relationship because I have reached out dark moment. So it not only allows people to serve you and to be there for you, but it actually develops a strong bond.
Yeah, when we're vulnerable as human beings, and vulnerability, it breaks down walls and it establishes trust and builds confidence in a relationship, whether that relationship is with a friend or a romantic relationship, a family relationship, that sort of thing. So, I think what you're doing is great. And I suggest to people, when they're struggling with depression or they know that it might be something lifelong, I say come up with a list of 5 friends or family members, and that's your emergency contact list. If you're really having a hard time and you need somebody to talk to, you work your way through that list. Because there's so many people that love us. And the thing about depression is we start thinking that we're weak or that there's something wrong with us or that nobody wants to be around us. But those friends and family members that love us, they're going to be there for us no matter what. So if you have that list of 5 people, even if you get really low in an emergency situation, you have people you can talk to. So that's definitely an important step to take right there as a safety measure, actually. Depression, like I said, it starts messing with the way you look at the world. And you might start thinking, well, nobody cares that I'm hurting. When in reality, everybody cares. You just might be doing such a good job of hiding it that they don't know. So sometimes opening up and just having people around can just make a huge difference.
And I think that's often the case. Someone might commit suicide and we're all blindsided. Mm-hmm. I know they were struggling with a few things, but you have no idea the depth of things that people go through. And I think we can kind of assume that everyone around us is going through the struggle of their lives. And maybe not only, and I was thinking the same thing, like we all need a buddy list. So I love that. But also, if we can reach out a little bit more, maybe to the people on our buddy list, so that they know that, just so we're kind of checking in on them as well to make sure they're doing okay. Because
Yeah.
again, it's really hard to reach out sometimes, and we need to do that. But it's also good to reach out to the people that we love and make sure, hey, you're
Well,
how's that going now?
yeah, it's interesting. As singles, we kind of check in with our friends through their Facebook or Instagram or that sort of thing, or even text messaging. And studies show that most people, for social media, they try to put their best face forward. So we assume that our friend is doing okay because they're posting all these pictures or these quotes, or they're out with friends, and it looks like life is going great on Facebook.
Because Facebook
But they may be at night. Yeah, because Facebook is so completely honest, right? But that's another thing I suggest too is for people, if you have even an inkling or a gut feeling that something might be wrong with one of your friends, ask them, and keep asking them until you're sure that everything's okay. Because again, they may not even want to deal with it. They may want to just pretend that nothing's wrong. So they may deny it themselves to themselves that they're struggling with depression. So if you just keep asking, that's part of being your brother's keeper, is sometimes you need to reach out to them when they don't know how to help themselves. So, but coming back to what you mentioned, friends of somebody who takes their life by suicide, it's very common to have kind of some survivor's guilt. Why didn't I see the signs? Why didn't I do more? What more could I have done? And I can tell you, my part of my story is, a lot of people look at me and they see the author, the speaker, the bobsled athlete, and do all these charity events, and they think everything's great. But I almost took my own life by suicide, years ago, and none of my friends and family knew because they just saw the outside me, but they didn't really know what was going on inside. So, to somebody who has lost someone to suicide, that guilt they feel is a weight that they shouldn't feel, right? Because chances are they were trying to be a good friend. They just didn't know the extent of the suffering. They were probably trying to do their best to be there. But suicide is a very complicated thing. It's a very complicated issue.
Well, I definitely went through that with this last suicide, and it's my second friend to commit suicide, and I went through all of that. This time I kind of felt myself. I did want a real back time. I was thinking if only I had reached out after I knew that she was going through some struggles, but I didn't know how bad it was. But then I caught myself and I thought, instead of looking back at what I could have, should have, would have done, let's look forward at what we can do to strengthen ourselves and why we're here today. Of like, what can we do moving forward? Because we can always do a little bit better.
Yeah. I think a big thing is actually for everybody to take some time to educate themselves on it. It's just like any other major topic that we're dealing with, For a lot of years, mental health and illness has been kind of a dark corner of life. A lot of people were dealing with it, but nobody wanted to talk about it, or they were embarrassed and ashamed about it. The reality is that 15 million Americans right now are dealing with major depression, right? That's a pretty big percentage. It's about 7% of the population deal with mental illness and depression, that sort of thing. So if somebody does feel those struggles in their life, they're not alone. There's also kind of in the background, we think maybe if I just have more faith, or if I pray more, that the depression will go away. But that's also like saying, if I have more faith and pray more, my cancer will go away, or my diabetes will go away. Mental health is a physical body thing, and it's a medical issue as well. So I say that because sometimes as members of the church, we might actually feel guilty for being depressed or having those negative thoughts that depression causes. And Satan uses that. He absolutely uses that to his advantage to make someone feel worse. When the reality is you can have all the faith in the world, but depression is still going to affect your thinking. And so that's a guilt that no LDS single or member of the church should carry. You know, depression is depression, and your faith is your faith, and you know, don't beat yourself up for struggling, I guess is one way to put it.
Right. No, I completely, and obviously that doesn't help the depression. Add the guilt to
No.
it.
Absolutely, yeah.
So,
But when the guilt comes in, guilt is it's just another weight that just you know kind of throws off the balance of our life, and it makes it really hard to. Depression can, in many ways, it's not that it blocks the spirit per se, but it influences our ability to see things with the eye of faith because we're looking through the eye of depression. And so I think sometimes members of the church need to be careful that they're not thinking that they're not strong enough because depression is affecting them.
Well, and like I said, like all the people that I've gotten to know really in depthly, they deal with whether it's long term or whether it's just situational. You know, something happens and everything kind of comes crashing down, and they get to a really dark
Yeah.
place. And I think it's so much more common than any of us really realize, and why we really should just try to be there for each other and be open, because you don't have to be embarrassed about something that everyone else around us deals with. Because
Yeah. Well, and you know, coming back to the kind of the mid-singles community, I mean, we do so much good. You look at the charity events and the organizations that we've supported, you know, this last year, and all the lives that we've influenced for good. Sometimes we need to take that power that we have for good and turn it internally within our group. You know, if we know somebody is struggling, you know, you get together as friends and you start thinking, you know, what can we do? How can we help that person? And I'm not talking like some sort of intervention, but I'm saying, you know, you use your faith, your prayers, your service opportunities, your love to just kind of carry that person through that period of depression.
Isn't
By
that what
doing
the gospel
that,
is about? And sorry to interrupt. Isn't that what the
yeah,
gospel is really about? Is not only doing those large service projects, but really just loving people. And because you love them, you want to serve them, and service is just another way of just being there for whatever needs that they have, and putting them first, and just being aware, being
yeah.
cognizant of their needs.
well,
Well, and that's where partially that. Yeah.
here's the question, though, because there's some of us, myself included, who don't really deal with this, right? I've never had a problem with depression, thankfully, and it's not something I've ever dealt with. So are there signs you can look for? Are there things you can look at? Because the reality is this single scene is way too big for me to reach out to every person and say, hey, I'm thinking about you. So, and some people just simply won't open up to others without really being prodded about what they're going through. So what is it that we can do in those situations to help people out there?
It's a really good question. Part of what you're bringing up is, you know, it's kind of proximity. How close is that person to you? How strong is your relationship? Obviously, if we see somebody struggling at a party, we're going to reach out and just, you know, maybe talk to them, say hi, get to know them, that sort of thing. But when you're talking about depression, usually the signs that you see come from you being a closer friend of that person, so you know their life. So some things to kind of watch for are personality changes in a way. You know, you see that maybe they look a little tired, meaning they're not getting much sleep. Depression does do that. Depression can affect appetite. It can affect, maybe you guys used to go, I don't know, maybe you used to go play basketball together, but they don't want to anymore, and they don't really have a reason for it, they just don't feel like it. So depression can affect their interests as well. They start losing interest in things that they like to do. So you kind of have to look at somebody and look at their overall mental state, look at their interests, their energy level. You know, that comes back to when I was talking about educate yourself. That's really important for everybody to do. But those are some basic signs to look for. If your friend is just down, they look like they're low energy, they look like they're just unhappy all the time, that's when you start asking, you know, hey, is everything okay? You know, you don't want to turn them into a project, but you love them enough to want to help them at that point. So does that kind of answer it a little bit?
Yeah, I think that did pretty good, you know, because one of the things is, you know, you're talking about if they look down at a party, but The problem is, like we said before, a party much like Facebook, people often put on a good front.
Yeah.
So it's hard
Yeah.
to really tell out at social events people that are going through
Mhm.
things like this.
Well, I
So
think if you're close to someone, like for me, just asking the in-depth questions, just as a matter of when you're hanging out with someone, getting below the surface, because it's, you know, obviously, I think if you're good friends with someone, you're probably going to be talking more than just
Yeah.
each other. And I think it is important anyway to get to know each other in the single scene on a more in-depth level, you know, and to connect on that more in-depth level. And as you do so, just like ask kind of probing questions about what's going on in their lives. And I think that, you know, that you can kind of, if they're struggling through something, you know, it's, those are the things, you know, that you kind of look for and that you maybe follow up with at some point and be like, hey, I know that you were kind of having a hard time with that breakup. How's that going? Or,
Yeah, I think that I think that we need to kind of break down those barriers, like you're talking about. We talked about how there's that kind of hesitancy to talk about, hey, I'm struggling, you know, hey, I'm having a hard time, because we don't want to admit that's going on.
Sure.
But then sometimes we're thinking, do I really want to bother them? Maybe they're okay. Do I want to ask if they're depressed? And one thing to keep in mind is by asking that one question, like you're saying, ask if they're okay, ask if they're struggling, ask what's going on. You may open the door to help them get out everything they've been carrying around and let go of all that weight they've been carrying around. So absolutely, like, it is better to ask the question and have them tell you, I'm okay, but maybe they're not okay, and maybe by you asking, you might literally save their life. So yeah, absolutely. If you feel like you need to ask that question, talk to them. Just privately, one-on-one,
right? And then if
take them out to lunch.
it gives them that opportunity to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, we do need to start wrapping up, but do you, any final thoughts, Jeremy? Anything that we haven't covered that you think is important on this topic?
You know, I think one big thing is for anyone struggling with mental illness who's a member of the church is to absolutely rely on the atonement. Sometimes it takes more than scripture reading. Sometimes it takes more than prayer. Sometimes it takes a fast. Sometimes it takes a priesthood blessing. I know for me, when I've struggled with depression at the really hard times, priesthood blessings were pretty powerful. But at the same time, having been at that low point, I can tell anyone listening that even though you feel that low and you feel that dark, there is always hope and there's always a brighter tomorrow. And a lot of that is through the Savior, and a lot of times He works through friends. So as mid-singles, as we reach out to others, we're doing His work, and we literally can save lives doing that, and just help someone get those burdens off their shoulders. So we have a lot of power, and I say we use it.
Thank you so much for joining us, Jeremy. And I hope that people continue the conversations and you know, maybe do just a little bit more to allow themselves to be a little bit more open with other people and to get to know people on a little bit more in-depth level. And don't wait for people to come to you necessarily to get to know you better. You know, just go ahead, be more approachable, approach more people, and follow up with people to see how they're doing when they're, you know, going through stuff or not even going through stuff. Just pick up the phone a little bit more. We could all do that.
Absolutely. So thanks, guys.
All
Thanks
right.
for being here, Jeremy, and thanks for everybody who joined us, and we will see you next week.